Game of Thrones. This night needs more money. Chapter 61. Noon. After several days of travel, the mud and blood of the Riverlands were finally behind them. But as the massive outline of King's Landing appeared before her, Brienne of Tarth felt no great relief, only a heavy weight in her heart. The closer they got, the unique scent of the capital surged into her nostrils, making her feel a bit breathless. As the capital of the Seven Kingdoms, everyone on the entire continent harbored a unique longing for King's Landing, and Brienne was no exception. But when she truly stood before this city, all her aspirations were instantly shattered. It wasn't that King's Landing wasn't grand enough. For Brienne, who had lived in the Stormlands since childhood, a super city like King's Landing, capable of holding 500,000 people, was incredibly astonishing in terms of both scale and architecture. But no matter what, she just couldn't form a good first impression of King's Landing. Because it smelled too awful. Just standing at the city gate, a nauseating stench assailed her, and even when she held her breath, the foul odor seemed to have a will of its own, relentlessly burrowing into her nostrils. This smell wasn't just ordinary bad, it was a unique blend of salty sea air, human sweat, and fermenting feces. How to describe it? It was even more outrageous than when Jaime hadn't bathed for a year, then rolled around in horse urine and mud, combined with the smell emanating from his wounds. One word. Overpowering. Cough, cough, cough. Unable to help but cough a few times, Brienne glared at Jaime, unable to resist blaming him. We could have come in directly through the gods' gate. Why did you insist on taking such a long detour, Jaime? Hearing this, Jaime didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked up. The bronze-clad iron gates were open, like a giant beast lazily opening its mouth to swallow and spit out people. Above the archway, the ferocious, roaring lion relief, with bared fangs and claws, displayed an oppressive power. A lion must act like a lion. Jaime's voice carried a hint of long-lost pride. He even couldn't help but close his eyes and take a deep breath. The nauseating stench, however, seemed to fill him with immense nostalgia. Under Brienne's look, as if she were seeing an idiot, Jaime muttered to himself, as if cheering himself on, a Lannister must enter through the Lion Gate. Everyone maintained a tacit silence regarding his almost deliberate posturing. They all understood that this fellow had indeed suffered too much on the journey. Captured, hand severed, drinking urine, drifting from place to place, his dignity repeatedly trampled. At this moment, his choice to reclaim his shattered self in this manner, though somewhat laughable, was understandable. Only Ego snorted, not knowing if it was because the Dothraki didn't understand the symbolic meaning of this stone nest, or because the big woman hadn't paid him much attention the whole way. Jaime straightened his back, full of smug satisfaction, and gently nudged his horse's belly, ready to pass through the city gate with the most dignified posture. However, just then, "Get out of the way. Don't block the road, country bumpkin." A rude shout and urgent hoofbeats sounded from behind. Immediately after, a lavishly adorned warhorse galloped past him. The rider wore a brightly colored silk jacket with a feather in his hat, looking like a young squire. To cut ahead, his whip almost grazed the nose of Jaime's mount. As he passed, he even turned his head and gave Jaime a look of disdain and provocation. Jaime's mount was startled, almost throwing him off its back. Fortunately, his horsemanship was quite good, and he managed to steady himself. However, the feces splashed up by the other horses' hooves covered him. Jaime just reacted, shouting curses at the disappearing figure. "Blind idiot, how dare you call me a country bumpkin? I am. Save it, Jaime." Fearing he might blurt out embarrassing remarks like, "My father is Tywin Lannister," Corleone quickly stepped forward to dissuade him. But he called me a country bumpkin." Jaime was indignant. He was Jaime Lannister, the richest fooling second-generation rich kid in the Seven Kingdoms. He had suffered enough torment and scorn in the warriors' group. If he was still treated this way upon returning to King's Landing, wouldn't his return be for nothing? He wasn't wrong. Looking at his indignant expression, Corleone shrugged indifferently. "Look at you now. What else are you if not a country bumpkin?" Hearing this, Jaime instinctively looked down at himself. Coarse linen clothes splattered with mud and dried blood, carefully styled golden hair greasy and matted, tangled together. His face covered in dust and sweat, his chin and cheeks sprouting messy stubble, and his right hand hanging from his chest in a crude sling. "Hey! You know what? It really did look like it. Jamie was a bit annoyed. When he left Harrenhal, he should have asked Roose Bolton for some decent clothes. Would Cersei like him returning to the Red Keep looking like this? But before he could adjust his mindset, he was forcibly pushed aside by another force. Move aside, country bumpkin. Brienne, on horseback, rudely squeezed between Jamie and Corleone, entering the Lion Gate first, leaving only her back to the others. Jamie stumbled from the shove but said nothing more. Instead, he glanced at Corleone beside him and shook his head helplessly. Both of them knew that Brienne was still brooding over the incident by the God's Eye Lake. Days earlier, when they had dealt with the Karstark soldiers and arrived at the lake, Arya and the Hound were already gone, leaving only Corleone and 2 corpses. Brienne instinctively wanted to give chase, as she didn't trust the Hound to treat a Stark well, but Corleone stopped her. He reminded her that another Miss Stark in King's Landing awaited her sword and her vows. Responsibility forced Brienne to abandon the pursuit, but it also made her feel the weight of what she carried grow even heavier. Let's go, blood of my blood. At the same time, Corleone gently shook the reins, shouted back, and then headed towards the city gate. Wait. Seeing this, Jamie quickly rode his horse to block Corleone's path, with a hint of dependence in his expression that was hard to detect. That's right, along the way, he had grown accustomed to Corleone's planning and companionship. Now, seeing the other party seemingly about to leave alone, he felt somewhat at a loss. Where are you going? Jamie swallowed. He swore by the 7 gods that even when charging Robb Stark amidst 1,000 armies, he had never been as nervous as he was now. To keep Corleone, he even eagerly invited, aren't you going to come with me to the Red Keep to see my father first? Don't forget, the bathtub full of gold dragons I promised you hasn't been delivered yet. That's not urgent. Looking at his anxious expression, Corleone just smiled and reached out, intending to pat Jaime's shoulder, but then noticed the feces on him and quickly withdrew his hand. You and Brienne go first, Jamie. Go spend time with your family, your sister, your brothers. You've been away from King's Landing for so long, they must miss you very much. He paused. A real man must spend time with his family. A man who doesn't take care of his family isn't a man at all. At these words, Jamie was completely stunned. Along the way, he had personally witnessed how Corleone was a master of calculation, showing considerable dedication to profit and gold dragons. For a mere 100 gold dragons, Corleone had even set a trap, effectively playing Stow and others to their deaths. In Jaime's mind, Corleone was a clear-headed pursuer of profit. He even felt that in some ways, Corleone bore a striking resemblance to his father, whose highest principle was self-interest. Yet, in the face of such a massive, easily obtainable reward, Corleone had displayed such a gentle side. He was even thinking of him, advising him to return home first and enjoy the long-lost family affection. What kind of vision and magnanimity was this? Looking at those sincere, deep eyes, the shock in Jaime's heart was beyond words, and Corleone's image in his mind once again became more complex and elevated. Indeed, he was a master of calculation, but he seemed to possess something his father lacked. It was an indescribable, human touch. Recalling again how Corleone had chosen to redeem Brienne over a reward back in Harrenhal, an indescribable warmth surged in Jaime's heart. This feeling of being understood, cared for, and even guided, was extremely rare in his life, which had been filled with betrayal and scorn. It even made Jamie involuntarily recall the towering figure who had personally knighted him. Corleone. When Jamie snapped out of his emotion, he found that Corleone had already blended into the crowd, merging with the clamor and chaos inside the Lion Gate. Only one sentence clearly reached his ears. Don't worry, Esser, later tonight, I will personally visit Lord Tywin. I hope by then, you will have my reward ready. Flea Bottom. The nauseating stench here was almost at its peak. If King's Landing was a giant cesspit, then Flea Bottom could almost be called the thickest, longest fermented, and most maggot-infested sediment at the bottom of that cesspit. Inside the most famous underground fighting arena, the Blood Cellar. The stench of sweat, blood, stale urine, and various other filth mingled together, almost suffocating. Flickering flames twisted in the pervasive smoke, illuminating every excited face like ghosts from hell. Among them were beggars, petty thieves, mercenaries, and even some well-dressed nobles, but here, everyone seemed to wear the same expression. In an inconspicuous corner, Corleone expressionlessly scanned the entire venue. Insight LV2 allowed him to capture many details. The trembling fingers of gamblers placing bets, the triumphant eyes of the bookmakers, the roars of winners, the defeated faces of losers. Humanity's most primal emotions were played out here nakedly, without concealment. Indeed, after taking down Stow and others, he had plundered over 100 gold dragons, raising his insight skill to LV2. It must be said that the northern savages were indeed poor. 20-odd men combined only yielded just over 100 gold dragons. At this moment, a bloody performance was underway in the arena below. A gaunt man, shirtless, fought 3 snarling wild dogs. He had no weapons and appeared to have received no training, merely clumsily waving his arms in defense. Such resistance was futile against the wild dogs, who had been hungry for who knew how many days. Soon, one wild dog bit his calf, dragging him to the ground, and the other 2 immediately swarmed him, beginning a frenzied tearing. The man screamed, but his cries were quickly drowned out by the excited roars of the crowd, who, along with the wild dogs, devoured him. Watching the bloody scene before him, Corleone remained expressionless, faintly uttering, "Crude." Indeed, his assessment was crude. Because he knew very well that although this was a fighting pit, the battles between beasts were merely an appetizer. What truly excited the audience and made them willingly part with their last copper coin was always the life and death struggle between humans, or between humans and beasts. In his previous life, during his combined bachelor's and master's studies, Corleone had briefly dabbled in psychology. Watching intense and thrilling life and death combat could trigger strong physiological reactions in humans, experiencing extreme tension and excitement. And when the number of viewers reached a certain level, this emotion would be sublimated. Shared fervor allowed people to unrestrainedly release the pressures of daily life. Furthermore, for the audience, the pleasure of controlling others' lives and deaths gave ordinary people the illusion of power, a highly alluring psychological experience. Therefore, from ancient times to the present, this sport has almost never ceased. However, in Corleone's view, the methods of the current fighting pit were simply too crude. If he were to manage it, the profits could perhaps increase by hundreds or thousands of times. While Corleone's mind raced, the commotion in the pit subsided. The man hadn't lasted long and quickly became the wild dog's lunch. Staff began to roughly herd the still eager wild dogs back into their cages with hooked long poles, then 2 men jumped into the pit and skillfully dragged away the tattered corpse, casually scattering a few shovelfuls of sand to barely cover the bloodstains. The entire process was highly efficient, like waiters clearing a messy dining table. Corleone tilted his head slightly, his gaze falling on the short, stout man beside him. "This place is pretty well managed by you. It seems you're doing quite well in King's Landing, Rorger." This statement sounded like both praise and a probing remark. Hearing this, Rorger immediately forced an awkward smile. "What are you saying, Boss Corleone? If I were doing well in King's Landing, I wouldn't have been arrested and sentenced to death." Indeed, this fellow had already woken up on the road and very shrewdly bowed down at Corleone's feet. Corleone wasn't surprised by this. After all, people like Rorger, who grew up in the lowest strata, almost all had their own logic of survival. Whoever had the harder fist, whoever had the crueler methods, that's who he'd follow, and he had no psychological burden whatsoever in admitting defeat. Otherwise, he wouldn't have immediately asked to take the black and join the Night's Watch after being sentenced to death. "I don't like listening to sycophantic nonsense." Corleone showed great indifference to Rorger's flattery. He merely tilted his head. 1,000 flattering words are less effective than doing one solid thing. Feeling Corleone's gaze, Rorger immediately understood. "Understood, Boss Corleone." He grinned, expertly pushed through the crowd, and walked towards a man sitting on a high stool at the edge of the fighting pit. The man was hunched over, rapidly recording on a rough scroll with a charcoal pencil. 3 burly strongmen stood beside him, presumably protecting him. Clearly, this was the person responsible for registering bets and managing the odds. In front of Rorger, at least 10 people were already waiting to place bets, but this was no challenge for a local like him, as he wasn't the type to queue obediently. Roughly pushing people aside with one hand, ignoring their angry glares, Rorger came before the bookkeeper, straightened his chest, and roared in a booming voice, "Next round. I bet 1,000 gold dragons." As his voice fell, the entire arena instantly quieted down, and the sound of sharp intakes of breath continuously echoed around, as if everyone wanted to suck the air dry from in front of them, suffocating those nearby. But, 1,000 gold dragons. This number was simply outrageous. This was a huge sum of money, enough to drive everyone in Flea Bottom mad. Betting over 1,000 gold dragons at once, not even the Lannister would bet like that. This kind of high-stakes gambling caused even some of the decently dressed nobles to crane their necks to look over, trying to see which family idiot dared to squander money so recklessly, dreaming of getting rich overnight. After years of continuous warfare, in the current economic climate of King's Landing, there was certainly no shortage of prodigal sons who had lost their ancestral fortunes and were desperate, attempting to stake their entire wealth on one chance to turn their luck around. For example, last month, the eldest son of House Kettleblack had splurged 500 gold dragons here, setting this year's record for a single bet. Now it seemed this record was about to be broken again. On the high stool, the registrar's hand trembled violently, and the charcoal pencil nearly dropped. 1,000 gold dragons. This was their monthly revenue. If they could take this money, it would be enough for the boss to accumulate the funds needed to buy a title and a landed estate. At that time, if the boss was happy, the bonus he gave out would at least be enough for several nights of spending on Silk Street. They absolutely had to fleece this big fat sheep. Thinking this, he quickly raised his head and met Rorger's eyes. Clatter. This time, the charcoal pencil truly fell. R.O. 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 The registrar looked as if he had seen a ghost, sliding off the high stool and landing on his backside on the floor, pointing at Rorger and unable to utter a complete sentence for a long time. Watching his panic, Rorger grinned, revealing his uneven yellow teeth. Long time no see, Maji. Rorger. That smile caused him to scream, scrambling backward a few steps. Weren't you captured by the gold cloaks and sent north with the Night's Watch? I saw you with my own eyes, chained and loaded onto the wagon. How did you? Because I missed you, good brothers, too much, Maji. Rorger leaned down, staring intently at Maji, sticking out his tongue to lick the corner of his mouth, and sneered with a perverse tone. So. I crawled back from that fooled hell. This tone made Maji even more terrified. He held his head and kept backing away, and it even seemed like a few drops of urine leaked from his crotch. The three sturdy men nearby did not seem to recognize Rorger, but Maji's appearance, coupled with the conversation between the two, allowed them to roughly guess that there might be some bad blood between them. Before Rorger could press closer, they professionally gathered around, surrounding Rorger. Get lost, noseless freak. The leader growled. If you're looking for trouble, you've come to the wrong place. If you don't leave now, I'll break your arms and legs and throw you out like a dog. Hey! Hey! Under their shoving, Rorger raised his hands high and retreated half a step, yet his face was full of mockery. Have some manners, friends. He yelled loudly, attracting more attention. I'm here to give you money. What, is the blood seller so rich now that it won't even accept a 1,000 gold dragon bet? Or is it, that dog fool Ralph, afraid he can't afford to pay if he loses? You should have said so. He might not have the balls, but I do. When I used to run this arena, I never turned anyone away. Hearing him say this, the three strong men immediately frowned, not daring to act rashly for a moment. Because Ralph, whom Rorger mentioned, was the boss of this arena, and judging by Rorger's tone, not only was he very familiar with Ralph, but apparently, he used to be the boss here. But at this moment, the surrounding crowd began to chatter amongst themselves. After all, if they refused Rorger's bet, the reputation of the arena would suffer. Just as they were finding the situation extremely tricky. Who said I wouldn't dare take it? A slightly hoarse yet powerful voice rang out from behind the crowd. Rorger turned his head to look, and the crowded people spontaneously parted to form a passageway. The man who arrived appeared to be in his 40s, slender, wearing an overly lavish purple velvet coat that looked completely out of place in the surrounding environment. Most striking was the cane in his hand, inlaid with a massive piece of amber, clearly worth a fortune. Tap, tap. The man walked over, limping, the cane striking the ground with a crisp sound. Arriving in the center, his gaze first swept over Maji, who was sitting on the ground, before he lowered his head to look down at Rorger. Under the watch of the crowd, the two men locked eyes. Corleone watched them from afar, suddenly feeling a strange sense of déjà vu, convinced that background music should start playing right now. Soft, soft laughter, bringing me warmth. You inject me with strong, happy electricity. I, Ralph, run a business, and I take as many gold dragons as you have. Suddenly, the man spoke. His voice was not loud, but very forceful, reaching everyone's ears. If you win, you'll be paid according to the odds, not a single coin less. That is the rule of my blood cellar. Pausing, he looked at Rorger with a trace of disdain, then revealed an arrogant and crude smile. Everyone in Flea Bottom knows that I, Ralph, have the biggest balls, super big. Ha 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 ha. These vulgar words drew a burst of laughter from the thugs around them. Hearing the laughter around him, Rorger's breathing instantly quickened slightly, and his eyes flashed with uncontrollable hatred. But he quickly suppressed this emotion. Look at that, Ralph. In front of everyone, Rorger shrugged. Look how well dressed you are now, even that Kane is ostentatiously rich. I suppose I can't walk as fast as you now. As soon as these words were spoken, Ralph's eyelids twitched violently, the muscles in his cheeks spasmed slightly, and he stared at Rorger with a murderous gaze. Cut the crap, Rorger. His voice turned cold. I don't care how you crawled back from that wretched place up north, and I don't care what you came back to do. 1,000 gold dragons. Bring them out and place the bet, and see if I dare to take it. Hearing this, Rorger grinned. What, is my name, Rorger, not worth 1,000 gold dragons? Don't forget, if I hadn't bought you back from that brown soup stall back then, you would have already been stewed into broth. Ha ha. Seeing that he truly couldn't produce the money, Ralph sneered, full of contempt. Rules are rules. Money first, then the bet is recorded. Did you forget the rules you yourself established just because you took a trip? As soon as he said this, Rorger's expression darkened. He seemed not to have expected the other party to disrespect him so openly. He subconsciously glanced quickly in Corleone's direction, only to see that his new master was still standing quietly in the corner, seemingly appreciating the bloodstains in the arena that had not yet been thoroughly cleaned, and was not looking at him, as if none of this concerned him. But this kind of disregard only made Rorger feel greater pressure. He was no idiot. Rorger had witnessed the friendship between Corleone and Jamie throughout the journey. Although he had followed Vargo Hoat in humiliating Jamie in every way before, that was based on the premise that they were far from King's Landing and far from Tywin. Now that they were back in King's Landing, the difference in status between him and Jamie would be like heaven and earth. Forget humiliation, the other party could crush him, this insignificant little ant, with just a look. Not to mention, when Corleone was merely a farmer, he was able to manipulate the entire warriors group, and eventually completely destroy them. Gritting his teeth, Rorger seemed to have made some kind of decision. He suddenly leaned close to Ralph's ear, lowered his voice, and whispered, Money, I don't have it right now. But don't you want that thing? That thing. Ralph's pupils suddenly contracted, and he gripped his cane tightly. That thing, you still have it. Although he knew Rorger was likely talking nonsense, the immense temptation still forced Ralph to lower his head and stare at the face so close to his own. 1,000 gold dragons. Rorger did not answer directly, but repeated, bet it all on the next match. If I lose, that thing is yours. Hearing this, Ralph narrowed his eyes slightly. But the other party's eyes were as cunning as ever, making it impossible to tell if he was telling the truth or lying. Fine, 1,000 gold dragons. After a long consideration, he slowly took a deep breath and angrily scolded Maji, who was sitting on the ground. Get up, you coward. You should have handled such a small matter with ease and composure. What are the odds for the next match? Hearing this, Maji hastily scrambled to his feet, grabbing the clipboard. It's 5-1, Boss Ralph. 5-1. Ralph frowned deeply. Why are the odds so high? It should be known that such ridiculous odds rarely appeared more than a few times a year. After all, high odds meant the odds for the other side would be pitifully low, perhaps only 1.2-1 or even less, which was done to prevent gamblers from betting on both sides for guaranteed profit. This also meant that the gamblers' bets would likely be heavily skewed toward one side, as the low odds, while meager, were almost a guaranteed win. B because the one entering the ring next is Butcher, Bode. Maji replied, and his challenger is a newcomer who just signed up. No one knows him, so. Butcher, Bode. Hearing this, Ralph nodded. That fellow was the Blood Pits cash cow, maintaining an undefeated record of 32 matches so far. Some even said that the moving mountain under Duke Tywin was no match for Bode. Of course, there might be some exaggeration, but in Flea Bottom, Bode definitely would not lose. But, Ralph looked at Rorger and sneered dismissively, betting 1,000 gold dragons, even if you pull off a scheme, you can only win 200 at most. Is that enough for you? Oh, Ralph. Ralph, you are still so naive. Hearing this, Rorger shook his head, looking disappointed, then flashed an even crazier smile. Who told you? I was going to bet on Bode winning. He paused deliberately, then suddenly raised his voice. 1,000 gold dragons, all on the newcomer. As soon as these words left his mouth, the venue erupted in an uproar, and everyone stared at Rorger as if he were an idiot. He's crazy. Absolutely insane. No one can take a punch from the butcher. That guy's arms are thicker than my waist. I bet that newcomer won't last 3 breaths. That noseless monster must have drunk too much brown soup and ruined his brain. Schadenfreude instantly filled the entire fighting pit. No one favored Rorger, as the butcher's strength was already well known. But Ralph did not laugh. He simply stared coldly at Rorger, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He truly couldn't understand what this guy was plotting. It seems going out really messed up your brain, Rorger. After thinking for a long time without figuring it out, Ralph simply snorted coldly. Fine, I'll watch how you lose. After delivering the threat, he leaned on his cane and turned to leave, but Rorger called out to him. Hey, Ralph. Ralph turned back impatiently. What? Thinking of backing out? No, no, no. I am not as indecisive as some people. Rorger wagged his finger, putting on a fake smile as he mocked, but look, shouldn't you treat a big customer like me, who is betting 1,000 gold dragons, properly? I want 2 excellent steaks, and a jug of Arbor gold wine, 10 years or older, delivered to my boss. He ordered the items skillfully, then raised his thumb and pointed toward Corleone's location. Ralph followed the direction and noticed a man standing in the corner. The man seemed to sense his gaze and nodded elegantly in acknowledgement. Boss. He frowned. This fellow looked unremarkable and wore no valuable accessories. Why would Rorger follow a boss like this? Do as he says. Ralph struck the ground hard with his cane, suppressing the doubt in his heart. He didn't dwell on it further and turned to leave, surrounded by several of his subordinates. Before they had walked far, a subordinate leaned in and whispered, Rorger, boss. Rorger, this guy suddenly came back, he must have some purpose. We screwed him over so badly back then. Before he could finish, Ralph's cold gaze choked the words back down his throat. HMPH. Glancing at Rorger, who was walking toward the stands, Ralph's eyes turned sinister, and he said in a deep voice, Go investigate. Find out who he and his boss really are. Yes, boss. Wait. The subordinate answered and was about to leave, but Ralph suddenly stopped him again. Go notify Captain Sven Rosby. Tell him the wanted criminal Rorger has returned to King's Landing, and he's right here. Huh. The subordinate was shocked and hesitated. Call the gold cloaks. Boss, that's not how things are done on the street. Besides, we run this kind of business. Calling the gold cloaks isn't just asking for trouble. Idiot. Ralph scolded him, a malicious smile twisting his lips. I've spent so much money in King's Landing this past year, feeding so many gold cloaks. It's time to make those guys who take money without doing work earn their keep. As you commanded, the matter has been settled, Boss Corleone. Returning to the stands, Rorger respectfully bowed to Corleone, maintaining a very humble posture. He felt a slight sense of pride, as he had not only completed the task but done so splendidly. However, the expected praise did not come. Instead, there was a quiet reprimand. You seem quite pleased with yourself. Hearing this, Rorger was first stunned, then raised his head, feigning confusion as he looked at Corleone. He saw a faint smile playing on Corleone's lips. Despite his seemingly casual sitting posture, an invisible pressure radiated from him. His throat tightened. Corleone was not in a hurry to scold him. Instead, he subtly adjusted his posture, leaning back, half of his face obscured in the boundary between light and shadow. Only the slightly smiling line of his jaw was exposed under the firelight. You disappoint me, Rorger. I didn't pull you out of a pile of corpses just so you could try these petty tricks in front of me. The powerful aura made it hard for Rorger to breathe. He swallowed with difficulty, insisting, I don't understand, boss. I did everything exactly as you commanded. Oh. Hearing this, Corleone chuckled, looking at him playfully. Then did I command you to unilaterally order food and wine, and then, deliberately draw those fellows' attention toward me. At these words, cold sweat immediately drenched Rorger's back. He hadn't expected that his small, slightly testing maneuver would be so easily and instantly seen through by Corleone. I'm sorry, Boss Corleone. I was wrong. Rorger, however, was quick to concede. He immediately gave up all resistance and dropped to his knees with a thud, moving so fast that Corleone was nearly caught off guard. Furthermore, he pulled out a dagger, held it with both hands, and offered it high above his head toward Corleone. Please punish me. Corleone did not speak. He simply reached out and leisurely picked up the dagger. After playing with it for a moment, he suddenly flicked his wrist, and the sharp edge slowly approached Rorger's flat face. He instinctively flinched backward, seemingly prompted by a deep, buried fear. The taste of having one's nose cut off must be very painful. Corleone spoke pointedly, life is inherently full of misfortune. But you are fortunate, because pain is not irreversible like death. As he spoke, the invisible sense of oppression grew stronger, almost solidifying. Rorger's breathing became heavy and short, and the cold sweat beating on his forehead began to run down his temples. But he kept his muscles tense and dared not move, fearing that the slightest action would bring about more severe consequences. Just as Rorger was about to be driven mad by this extreme internal pressure, Corleone raised his wrist and casually tossed the dagger back to him. You have harmed me, Rorger. Corleone's voice was devoid of emotion. You broke my trust. This is the first time. I will remember it, and I hope you will remember it too. Do you understand? Why, yes. Bo. Furthermore, Corleone looked at him coldly and reminded him, from now on, address me as Lord Corleone. Yes, Lord Corleone. Rorger instantly straightened his body and answered loudly without hesitation. Only then did he feel relieved, and he hastily wiped the sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. But before he could completely relax, he heard Corleone's voice sound again. Now, we can discuss another matter. I am very curious, what promise did you give Ralph that could be worth a full 1,000 gold dragons, based on just one sentence? Corleone, my lord. Rorger had just opened his mouth to explain when he was interrupted by a wild cheer. The crowd instantly erupted, all attention drawn to the entrance of the fighting pit. Corleone raised a hand, signaling him to be quiet, his gaze calmly fixed downwards. Let's watch the match first. Although he was also curious about Rorger's trump card, the environment here was too noisy and clearly not suitable for discussing important secrets. With Corleone's approval, Rorger finally breathed a temporary sigh of relief and sat obediently beside him, his demeanor much more subdued. Under the gaze of countless fervent eyes, a corpulent man walked out from one side of the arena. He wore only a brown hardened leather vest on his upper body, his thick arms exposed. Most striking were the blackened bloodstains splattered across the leather apron on his chest. Dressed like this, he looked exactly like a butcher. Bored. Seeing him appear, Rorger immediately leaned closer to Corleone with keen observation, applauding with him while introducing, this fellow used to be an honest butcher, making a living by slaughtering livestock for noble lords. He was skilled and saved quite a bit of money. But then, one day he came home and found his wife having an affair with a male prostitute from Silk Street. So he killed his wife. Corleone's eyelids barely lifted, his tone devoid of any emotion. In Westeros, such stories were not new, even somewhat cliché. Yes. Rorger clicked his tongue. Actually, he didn't intend to kill her at first, only planning to chase away that pretty boy. But his wife was determined to run off with that fellow, and no matter how Borde knelt and begged her, the woman wouldn't budge. Not only that, she even took out Borde's life savings, accumulated over half a lifetime, right in front of him, intending to use that money to elope with her lover. Foolish. Corleone offered this assessment. Women always fail to truly understand that their strength is always at an absolute disadvantage in front of men. Perhaps men usually tolerate their little tempers, even letting them hit or scold them. But when she truly angers a man, and he gets serious, the woman will be utterly defenseless. You are absolutely right, Corleone, my lord. Hearing his assessment, Rorger echoed. In a fit of rage, Borde used his cattle slaughtering knife to butcher that pair of dogs. Then, he sold the ingredients to a stall owner in Flea Bottom who sold brown soup. His tone even carried a hint of admiration. It is said that the first bowl of that brown soup was bought by Borde himself and drunk mouthful by mouthful in front of all the diners. Very cheap, a big bowl full, only 2 copper coins. Upon hearing this, Corleone raised an eyebrow slightly and turned his head to glance at Rorger. How do you know so much about it? Rorger chuckled. This matter caused quite a stir in Flea Bottom back then. The gold cloaks were going to hang him according to the law. I paid 50 gold dragons to bail him out. Later, he had nowhere to go, so he worked here in the arena. I have to say, this guy is a great fighter. Back then, besides Fang, Borde was the one who earned the most money for me. At this point, Rorger suddenly stopped. Because he remembered in time that Fang had died by the hand of the person in front of him. He quickly fell silent, glancing nervously at Corleone. Corleone, however, waved his hand, indicating it didn't matter. His magnanimity was not so narrow as to be unable to mention a dead person. But he raised another question. Since you were able to bribe the gold cloaks to save Borde with money back then, how did you yourself end up being sentenced to death later? At these words, Rorger immediately showed a twisted smile, a mix of resentment and self-mockery. Ha ha. I got tripped up in the gutter, betrayed by my subordinates, that's all. Those guys thought I wasn't giving them enough money, blocking their path. Ralph was the leader. Speaking of which, that kid's life was saved by me. Sigh. Why bring that up, it's all in the past. He shook his large head, but most importantly, it was because the Gold Cloaks got a new commander. The previous commander of the Gold Cloaks was Janos Slint. That guy was utterly black-hearted, insatiably greedy, but as long as the money was right, anything could be discussed. However, he was later accused of corruption, stripped of his cloak, and sent north in black. His replacement, Jocelyn Bywater, was an unyielding hardliner who only recognized his chivalry and the king's law, and wouldn't take gold dragons at all. Suddenly, Rorger's tone became gleeful again, but thankfully, I heard that kid was blown to bits by wildfire in the Battle of Blackwater River, serves him right, ha ha. Hearing him say that, Corleone nodded, indicating he understood. In this short year and more, power shifts and personnel changes in King's Landing affected every corner. People like Rorger or Ralph, though prominent figures in Flea Bottom, were as insignificant as specks of dust before the true power holders. They might never even have their names known by them until the day they died. Since you know Borde so well. Tapping his knuckles on his knee, Corleone turned to Rorger and asked in a flat tone, then, what do you think are our chances of winning this bet? Rorger immediately grinned, revealing a supremely confident smile. We will definitely win, Corleone, my lord. He said emphatically, I suggest you should now be thinking about how we're going to break Ralph's other leg if that fooled cripple tries to renege on his debt after losing. Seeing his confidence, Corleone's lips also curved slightly upwards, forming a meaningful arc. Winning this match was just the first step of his plan. As an outsider, with no family, no background, he could only rely on his own mind and his money-grubbing golden fingers. And Jamie, their friendship was indeed good, but he couldn't constantly demand things from Jamie without limit. Corleone knew very well that friendship required equality of status and identity to be maintained. If one party was always giving endlessly, that friendship would eventually run out. This Flea Bottom, though in the eyes of the powerful, was a stinking, dirty place they wished they could cut off and discard like rotten meat. But in Corleone's view, this was the cornerstone for him to establish himself in King's Landing, and even build his own vast empire step by step. Narrowing his eyes slightly, his gaze swept over the frenzied crowd, landing on the other side of the arena. Under everyone's gaze, the arena host used all his strength to stretch out his voice, loudly announcing, next up, entering the arena is, a brand new face. From across the narrow sea. Ye go. Meanwhile, the Red Keep, the Hands Tower. Jamie stood before the large desk, a roaring fireplace behind him. He had washed away the grime of his journey, once again donning his signature white cloak and armor. His long golden hair was trimmed, and his face was cleanly shaven. Aside from his right arm, which seemed jarringly conspicuous, he appeared to have returned to being the handsome and dashing Kingsguard. However, at this moment, there was no joy on his face. Instead, his tightly clenched jaw showed profound irritation. All of this stemmed from the middle-aged man sitting opposite him, behind the desk. His posture was straight as a pine, his shoulders broad, and his knuckles thick, exuding a sense of power. His hair was the typical Lannister gold, though he was balding slightly, and his temples were streaked with gray. It was meticulously combed. He was dressed impeccably in a dark velvet doublet, its collar and cuffs embroidered with intricate gold thread patterns, and a small golden lion pin affixed to his chest, appearing both understated and luxurious. But beneath his calm, sharp, emerald eyes, which seemed capable of piercing all pretense, everything else faded into the background. He was Jaime's father, the Duke of Castle Rock, Warden of the West, and the current hand of the king. Tywin Lannister. However, after more than a year and countless hardships, this father-son reunion held no trace of tender sentimentality. Instead, the atmosphere was highly strained. If there is nothing else. Jaime spoke coldly, breaking the silence first. I believe I should go and fulfill my duties as a Kingsguard. To protect the king. His tone lacked any respect for his father or the warmth expected of a reunion after a long separation, holding only distance and antagonism. Tywin's reply was equally icy. You are not my son. You claim you are the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, and that is the meaning of your life. Very well, sir. I shall not impede you from performing your duties. Hearing this, Jaime was filled with immense indignation. Just moments ago, he had entered this office filled with anticipation and joy. Yet, his father showed not an ounce of sympathy or concern regarding his experiences in the Riverlands. The very first thing he did was forcefully demand that Jaime resign from the Kingsguard, shed his white cloak, and return to Castle Rock to inherit the family legacy. From start to finish, Tywin had not offered a single word of greeting, acting as if his capture, imprisonment, and even the loss of his right hand were merely trivial matters. I suppose I can take this, can't I? Just as he was about to depart in anger, he pointed to the newly forged Valyrian steel sword before him. You said you would give it to me. Of course. Tywin did not look up, his tone flat but laced with utmost sarcasm. How is a Kingsguard without a hand supposed to protect the king if he doesn't even have a sharp weapon? This blatant mockery made Jaime's rage nearly burst through his chest. He snatched up the Valyrian steel sword, ready to storm out, but then seemed to remember something and stopped. Before returning, I promised someone who helped me a bathtub full of gold dragons as payment. A Lannister always pays his debts, doesn't he, Lord Tywin? Jaime lifted his chin, his voice carrying an emotion he himself couldn't quite decipher, as if issuing a challenge. Hearing this, Tywin still did not look up, but the sarcasm on his lips deepened. Indeed, a Lannister always pays his debts. But are you a Lannister, sir? Oh it seems you are. He dramatically slapped his forehead. Look at that, I almost forgot until you mentioned it. I thought ever since you joined the Kingsguard, you ceased being a Lannister. Facing such continuous scorn from his father, Jaime felt an unprecedented humiliation, but remembering his promise to Corleone, he forcibly suppressed the urge to slam the door and leave. He stood rigidly in place, staring fixedly at Tywin, his left hand gripping the sword hilt tightly, looking determined not to give up until he achieved his goal. After a moment, Tywin seemed to finish the document he was working on. He finally looked up at his son, whose face was pale with fury, and a flicker of surprise crossed his eyes for the first time. He knew Jaime too well. Proud, impulsive, and quick to anger. Given his son's nature, he should have stormed off long ago after such humiliation. But today, Jaime had endured it until now. He saved your life? Tywin asked curiously. Yes, he saved my life. Jaime took a deep breath, meeting his father's gaze, but at the same time, he is my friend. Ha! Tywin sneered, setting down his pen dismissively. I remember how much you loved making friends when you were little, Jaime. Adam Marbrand, the Brax brothers, and so on. You always enjoyed being the center of attention. But you never understood that all that flattery, all those sycophantic performances, were only because of who you were, because you bore the Lannister name, because you were my son. I understand. Watching his father's look of disappointment, Jamie gritted his teeth and retorted, raising his voice. Then, staring intently at Tywin, he affirmed word by word. But, Vito Corleone, he is different. Tywin was stunned. He seemed not to have expected Jamie to be so certain. Go find Tyrion. After a long silence, Tywin lowered his head to handle his documents again. He is the master of coin now. A bathtub full of gold dragons is no small amount. He deserves that much money. Seeming to feel victorious, Jamie raised an eyebrow smugly, then turned and walked toward the door. Just as he was about to touch the doorknob, Tywin's undeniable command came from behind him. Bring that Vito Corleone before me. I want to see him tonight. We won, Lord Corleone. The arena was silent, save for Rorger, who excitedly leapt up from his seat, waving his arms and shouting loudly, making his outburst seem rather abrupt. In the center of the pit, the butcher, Bord, who had been so aggressive moments before, now lay on the ground covered in blood, only the faint rise and fall of his chest proving he was still alive. Yigo, meanwhile, was only slightly winded, wiping his bloody hands casually on his coarse trousers, as if killing him had been no more tiring than killing a dog. Just as Rorger had boasted, even though Bord was the toughest fighter in Flea Bottom besides Fang, even Fang himself, back when they were in the Warriors group, couldn't last 5 rounds against Yigo. Sure enough, the fight ended quite quickly, before people even had time to react. 5,000 gold dragons. Ralph, you fool, come out and pay up. Rorger grinned widely, revealing his yellowed teeth and laughing heartily, practically wearing the words, Schadenfreude, on his forehead. Although he had once been half-owner of this arena, he had never handled such a massive sum of money. By his estimation, this was nearly the total profit of the blood cellar for several months, perhaps longer. And now, that fooled traitor Ralph was about to shoulder this enormous debt of 5,000 gold dragons. This was enough to drain most of the fellow's savings, perhaps even bankrupt him. Just thinking about Ralph's pained and frustrated expression was enough to make Rorger laugh out loud with delight. Serves him right. Calm down. Compared to Rorger's excitement, Corleone appeared quite calm. Because he knew that winning the bet was never the end of the matter. On the contrary, it would be the beginning of another round of trouble. After all, with such a large sum of money, no one would willingly hand it over, especially when the opponent was someone like Ralph. But it didn't matter. A great man once said that struggling against others brings endless joy. Sure enough, just as Corleone finished speaking, he caught sight of Ralph, surrounded by several grim-faced subordinates, walking toward them once again. Gently patting Rorger's shoulder, Corleone slowly and calmly stood up. After you get the money, remember to remind me to buy a cat first. Buy a cat? Rorger was stunned. Why buy a cat? Does Boss Corleone like cats? I should write that down in a little notebook. Before he could ask further, Ralph had already brought his men closer, his eyes fierce, as if he wanted to devour both of them alive. Well done. Ralph gritted his teeth as he glanced at Yigo in the arena, then turned his head to stare intently at Rorger. Although I don't know where you found such a formidable fighter, I have to say, that was full well done. As he spoke, he forced a smile, pulling up the corner of his mouth, and praised, You've gotten smarter, Rorger. If you had been this smart back then, you wouldn't have been hauled off in a prison cart like a stray dog, right? Now that things had come to this, how could he not realize he had fallen into their trap? A newcomer whose name he didn't even know had taken down the undefeated Bord in just a few rounds, coupled with Rorger's convenient return, and the fact that he had placed a heavy bet of 1,000 gold dragons, even using that thing as collateral. If he still couldn't see the trickery involved, Ralph would have been gnawed down to the bone in Flea Bottom long ago. Cut the crap. Facing Ralph's mockery, Rorger just chuckled, looking up at him with his nostrils flared, and spread his hands, declaring righteously, Pay up, Ralph. 5,000 gold dragons, short 1 copper piece and all fooling. That's quite rude of you, Rorger. Before he could finish his sentence, he was directly interrupted by Corleone. Corleone's tone held a hint of reproach, and Rorger immediately fell silent, looking at him confusedly, but still instinctively took a step back. Next, Corleone turned to Ralph, a surprisingly friendly smile appearing on his face, and proactively extended his hand. This is just business, isn't it, my lord? Business is always like this. Today I win, tomorrow you win. Back and forth, that's how gold dragons circulate instead of turning into useless junk gathering dust in a warehouse. Looking at the arm extended towards him, Ralph paused slightly. Even in this noisy environment, he could sense an indescribable aura emanating from this seemingly ordinary man standing before him. For a moment, he had the illusion that he was facing a truly powerful magnate. Dignity LV2. Driven by an inexplicable impulse, Ralph instinctively reached out and grasped Corleone's arm. Oh no. The moment their hands met, alarm bells rang loudly in Ralph's heart. He instinctively sensed trouble. But before he could react, Corleone pulled hard, drawing him into his chest, and gave him what appeared to be a very enthusiastic hug. At the same time, a whisper came into his ear. Did no one ever tell you never, ever to shake hands easily with your enemy? You son of a. Before he could curse, Corleone was slapping Ralph on the back with great abandon, intentionally raising his voice and proclaiming. Ha ha ha. It was a pleasure doing business, Ralph. Thanks to your help, we made a killing this time. Shit. Ralph's heart clenched violently, and he quickly pushed Corleone away, his face instantly turning ashen. However, it was already too late. Everyone had seen their warm and friendly embrace. The actions of the two men were already highly suspicious, and combined with the fact that the formidable board had been defeated in just a few rounds, the audience was already questioning the results. Now, Corleone's single phrase, "It was a pleasure doing business," instantly became the final straw. It's fixed. A gambler who had lost everything roared hoarsely. Cheaters. These two fools are in cahoots. They planned this whole thing to scam us out of our money. Refunds. In an instant, the crowd became agitated, and the gamblers who had lost money began to shout angry accusations. As the saying goes, the thing humans are best at is following the tide. Under the force of public opinion, not only the losing gamblers but also many confused bystanders quickly joined the chorus of condemnation. Most people began to demonstrate the charm of language towards Ralph, hurling the foulest insults imaginable. If it weren't for the 7 or 8 strong subordinates standing next to him, Ralph would probably have been torn to shreds by now. You fooling set me up. Listening to the deafening roar of curses surrounding him, Ralph instantly flew into a rage. He gripped his cane tightly, wishing he could tear Corleone limb from limb immediately. This shameless framing was even more vicious than forcing him to pay out 5,000 gold dragons. Because this was practically destroying his foundation. If this matter wasn't handled properly and the arena's reputation was ruined, who would dare come here to place a bet again? He had to remember, this arena didn't belong to Ralph alone. If the boss behind him found out he had messed up, his corpse might appear at some brown soup stall tomorrow morning. That fooled outsider, he was too malicious. You need evidence for your claims, Lord Ralph. Under Ralph's furious gaze, Corleone merely shrugged, his expression unreadable. Be careful, I might sue you for slander. This brazen, unyielding attitude infuriated Ralph even more. He almost gave in to the urge to order his men to hack the man to death immediately. But in plain sight of everyone, he absolutely could not do that. That would only be seen by everyone as a murder to silence a witness, confirming the accusation that he had colluded with others to scam money. An open scheme. This was a blatant, open scheme. Ralph clenched his teeth so hard his gums nearly bled. He took a deep breath, trying his best to calm down, intending to instruct his men to immediately placate the agitated crowd. Even if it meant taking a temporary loss, they had to stabilize the situation first. But just then, bang! The arena doors were violently thrown open from the outside, the loud noise interrupting the clamoring crowd. Following this, a dozen or so soldiers wearing golden cloaks filed in. They expertly dispersed, quickly securing the entrance area. The sudden appearance of the gold cloaks silenced the people present, who no longer dared to shout recklessly. After all, as King's Landing's almost sole violent law enforcement agency, the gold cloaks held the power of life and death over all the common people to a certain extent. Ralph, on the other hand, let out a sigh of relief. Regardless, the timely arrival of the gold cloaks at least bought him some breathing room. As long as he dealt with these two men, his reputation still had a chance of recovery. A hint of smugness reappeared on Ralph's face. Seizing the moment, he leaned close to Corleone's ear and whispered, mimicking Corleone's earlier action, I don't know which gutter you crawled out of, trash. But didn't anyone tell you that in King's Landing, if you want to make it, you need power, you need connections. You thought a little trick would be enough to bring me down. Bullshit. Heavy footsteps accompanied by the clanking of metal armor. The gold cloaks roughly pushed aside the crowd, clearing a path. Squad leader Sven Rothesby walked in, his hand resting on his sword hilt and a hint of arrogance on his face. His gaze swept over the noisy crowd, seemingly meeting Ralph's eyes by chance. After receiving a subtle signal from him, his focus finally settled on Rorger. Ralph, you filthy parasite, you godfool broke the rules. The moment the gold cloaks burst in, Rorger jumped up and started cursing loudly. Did I not teach you that no matter how big a commotion happens in Flea Bottom, you shouldn't call the gold cloaks to interfere? Have rats from the sewer chewed up your brain? I really should have thrown you away in. Bang. He kept shouting curses, but two gold cloaks immediately rushed forward. One used a hammer to strike the back of his knee, forcing him to kneel, while the other smashed a spear against Rorger's mouth. Corleone watched from the side, sighing inwardly. Too professional. Strike the legs first to prevent escape, then strike the mouth to keep him from talking nonsense. The entire sequence was fluid and the coordination was impeccable. It was then that Sven Rothesby slowly strolled forward, his polished boots stopping right in front of Rorger. He looked down and mocked, tisk, tisk, tisk. Rorger, Rorger. For scum like you to have crawled back to King's Landing is already a mercy of the seven, yet you dare to brazenly show yourself here. Truly foolish. Pa. Even with his face swollen, Rorger struggled to lift his head and spat out a mouthful of bloody foam. Hey, Sven Rothesby. Haven't seen you in over a year, you're doing well, becoming a squad leader. Do you remember who it was who lost everything, down to his breeches, at the South Sai casino, eventually pawning his own sword, and then weeping on his knees begging me to lend him 100 gold dragons? Bang. Before he could finish, the infuriated Sven kicked him in the face again. Luckily, Rorger had no nose, otherwise, this blow would truly have made his eyes water. Shut up. Clearly, Rorger's words had hit a nerve for Sven. He half drew his sword, but remembering the many onlookers and the difficulty of killing someone outright, he reluctantly sheathed it again. Fool fugitive, still daring to spout nonsense. He straightened his back and pointed at Corleone standing nearby. Lock up this fugitive and his accomplice, and take them back to the dungeon. Under Sven's command, several gold cloaks immediately advanced toward Corleone. Just then, a flurry of rapid footsteps sounded not far away. Sven looked back in confusion, only to see an eagle-like figure leap high. The moment he landed, his right foot kicked one gold cloak in the side of the waist, and his left elbow struck the face of another gold cloak. Bang! Bang! Two muffled, sharp sounds, and the two gold cloaks attempting to approach Corleone immediately collapsed. The entire process took but a breath. Before anyone could react, the tall, muscular Dothraki warrior had already drawn his weapon and positioned himself in front of Corleone. Like a mastiff protecting his master, he slightly hunched over, his pair of sharp eyes fixed intently on Sven ahead of him. Shall I kill them, blood of my blood? Yigo tilted his head slightly and asked in a low, booming voice, seemingly disregarding the dozen or so gold cloaks. This display of powerful martial skill and dramatic entrance immediately stunned everyone present. Sven, who had been so arrogant moments ago, couldn't help but reach for the hilt of his sword, though his visibly trembling arm betrayed his inner fear. Put away your weapon, blood of my blood. In the midst of this tense atmosphere, Corleone spoke calmly. His voice was not loud, but in the surrounding silence, it was perfectly clear. Turning to Sven, he used his left hand to lightly brush off the shoulder where the gold cloak had touched him, as if merely flicking away a speck of dust. I have always believed that violence cannot solve fundamental conflicts. Legal issues should be resolved within the framework of the law. Am I wrong, Captain Rothesby? This extraordinary calmness stunned Sven, who had been preparing to order his men to charge forward. The composure of the man, and the subtle aura emanating from his words, momentarily left him, an experienced gold cloaks squad leader, feeling uncertain. Sven narrowed his eyes, removed his right hand from the sword hilt, and cautiously sized up Corleone. His clothes were simple, and his appearance unremarkable, yet he possessed such an imposing demeanor and a bodyguard of such formidable strength. Out of caution, He suppressed the aggressive expression on his face and tentatively asked, "Sir, what is your name? Do you hold a title?" While asking about someone's background and origins so directly might have seemed offensive in Corleone's previous life, in Westeros, it was perfectly normal. Generally speaking, nobles had their own set of procedures. Knowing the family and surname beforehand helped clearly distinguish between nobles and commoners, and the attitude and outcome of handling the situation would naturally differ. Simply put, it was about judging the person, not the crime. "My name is Vito Corleone." Corleone answered frankly, without any hesitation or concealment. "Corleone." Sven frowned slightly, quickly searching his mind for all the noble lineages and important surnames he knew. He finally concluded that this was definitely not a family he recognized. Nevertheless, he did not relax his guard and pressed further. "Then, do you serve under any lord, or hold any important position in a certain castle?" "There is no need to guess, Captain Rothesby." Easily seeing through his petty thoughts, Corleone spoke with great composure. "Relax. I hold no title, nor do I hold office anywhere, nor do I descend from any noble family known to you. In fact, to me, King's Landing is practically a completely foreign place. This is my first time here." This answer seemed to surprise Sven, but before he could react, Ralph beside him burst out in impatient mockery. "Ha ha ha. I thought we had a great lord here, but it turns out he's just a nobody." His triumphant laughter sounded particularly grating in the silent fighting pit. Even Sven, upon hearing Corleone admit to having absolutely no background, prepared to order the arrest again. However, at that moment, Corleone spoke once more. But then again, he slightly raised his right eyelid, his dark eyes calmly sweeping over Sven and Ralph. His voice held a slight magnetism, and though he appeared somewhat languid, no one could ignore the serious aura surrounding him. "Although I hold no position or title, I do happen to know some people who sit on the royal council. They are mostly highly placed and powerful, and they all regard me as a friend." Saying this, Corleone stepped forward. Meeting Sven's flickering gaze, he leaned forward slightly. His voice was lowered, carrying a tone of near pity, as if stating an already predetermined future. "Listen to me, Captain. You can arrest me and my people right now, lock us in chains, and throw us into your dark, dirty cells. It would be easy, you are perfectly capable of doing that. But I can tell you what happens next." He paused, allowing the other man time to fully digest his words, then continued with certainty. "It won't take a whole night, perhaps only half a night, before a certain, powerful figure whom you absolutely do not want to offend, will personally kick down the door of your little duty room. He won't listen to any of your explanations. He will curse you out in front of all your subordinates using the foulest language imaginable. And then, you will be forced to make a choice. Not whether or not to release me, but whether you respectfully escort me out, or whether you are dragged out of the Gold Cloak's headquarters like a dead dog by your former colleagues." These words were very flat, without a hint of anger, yet they made Sven Rothesby feel a chill rise from his spine. This guy, his tone was too certain, he looked absolutely confident. Could it be that he really knows some big shot that he, Sven, can't afford to offend? "Are you threatening me?" He stared intently into Corleone's eyes, seemingly trying to catch a trace of a lie, but unfortunately, those dark eyes just looked at him calmly, without the slightest panic. "I'm just stating a fact." Corleone shrugged. "No matter what choice you make, the final outcome will be the same anyway. So, why waste each other's time enacting this meaningless process?" As soon as these words came out, the muscles on Sven's face twitched slightly, and he began to weigh the pros and cons in his heart. He was able to climb from a rotten gambler wallowing in the mire of a casino, step by step, to the position of a Gold Cloak's captain. Besides the necessary ruthlessness, it was even more inseparable from his ability to size up the situation at critical moments. Of course, most importantly, during the Battle of Blackwater River, the king's brother, Tommen Baratheon, was sent to Rothesby to seek refuge. And he, as a distant cousin of the Earl of Rothesby, also benefited somewhat, which led to his promotion after the war. He didn't dare to gamble. What if behind this man truly stood a big shot he absolutely couldn't afford to offend? Then everything he had gained with such difficulty could vanish in an instant. Sven's expression kept changing, but Ralph, who was beside him, saw that he was hesitating and was so anxious he almost jumped up. He knew very well that if he couldn't use the gold cloaks to nail the three of Corleone today, then what awaited him was a huge debt of 5,000 gold dragons. This enormous sum would be enough to drain his savings of many years, and his true boss behind him would never bear this loss for him. Even worse, the boss might even send people to deal with him personally. Liar. Ralph, burning with anxiety, immediately stepped forward. He pointed at Corleone, his voice sharp. He's just a liar, don't believe him, Captain Sven. This guy can't even produce 1,000 gold dragons for a bet, how could he possibly know any big shot? He definitely has no background, he's just putting on an act. Hearing this, Sven's eyes began to flicker again. Seeing him like this, Ralph immediately struck while the iron was hot. Think about it, Captain Sven, I am the most heavily taxed legitimate merchant in Flea Bottom. I guarantee with the reputation of the blood seller that this guy is just an ordinary person who got lucky, who picked up this stray dog Rorger from who knows where, and conspired to extort me. If you don't give me a fair outcome, wouldn't it discourage all law-abiding merchants like me in King's Landing? He spoke righteously, appearing like an honest and upright businessman being extorted. However, Sven narrowed his eyes slightly. The guy's words, both overtly and covertly, were threatening him. Yes, Ralph was indeed a major taxpayer in Flea Bottom, but most of those taxes ended up in his, Sven Rothesby's, pocket. After all, without Ralph's bribes, his meager salary alone would not be enough to support Sven's monthly indulgence in Silk Street, let alone his high-stakes gambling. One must know, the consumption on Silk Street was not cheap. A decent prostitute for a night cost dozens of silver stags, about 1/10 of a gold dragon. But then again, although Ralph was threatening him, if this guy named Corleone really had connections, why would he be dressed so shabbily and unable to produce even 1,000 gold dragons for a bet? Sven's mind raced. To sacrifice his stable source of income for an outsider of unknown origin. Even a fool would know how to choose. Cuff them. After much deliberation, greed ultimately outweighed that trace of unease in his heart. Sven suddenly waved his hand and sternly ordered his subordinates, bring these three fugitives back to headquarters. I'll interrogate them personally. He emphasized the word, fugitives, to justify his actions. Under Sven's command, several gold cloaks cautiously stepped forward again, producing iron shackles. As soon as their feet moved, Yigo instinctively let out a low growl, his muscles tensed, his eyes fiercely scanning every face that approached Corleone. This menacing demeanor actually intimidated the gold cloaks for a moment. Although they had the advantage in numbers, with the fate of two comrades fresh in their minds, no one wanted to be the first to act. A few hundred copper stars a month, what's the point of risking your life? But just as the two sides were at a stalemate, Corleone once again raised his head and placed his hand on Yigo's shoulder. Don't be impulsive, blood of my blood. He took a step forward, his voice unusually steady and pointed. Sometimes, a temporary bow is to see the longer path to victory more clearly. Yigo was somewhat confused by these obscure words, but his loyalty to Corleone still made him snort coldly, compose himself, and no longer resist. Seeing this, the gold cloaks breathed a sigh of relief and continued forward. To their surprise, Corleone actually extended his hands, very consciously placing them into the shackles. With a click, the cold iron shackles locked his wrists, but his body remained upright. His relaxed demeanor was not like a prisoner about to become captive, but rather like a knight preparing to attend a boring banquet, temporarily bound by cumbersome etiquette. When the shackles were on, Corleone slowly raised his head, his gaze seeming to pass through the crowd, staring directly at Sven Rothesby. You disappoint me greatly, Sven Rothesby. You've complicated something that was originally very simple. Tonight, I was supposed to meet a true big shot, but you've ruined everything. His voice wasn't particularly loud, and he wore heavy shackles, yet Sven always felt an intense sense of oppression emanating from him. To appear less passive, Sven let out a forced, casual scoff. Stop putting on an act, kid. I'm sure I'm the biggest, big shot you've ever met in your life. However, Corleone seemed to see through his bravado and spoke, enunciating each word. Laugh now, while you can. You will pay a price far beyond your imagination for your decision today. Perhaps now is not the time, but please believe, there will be a moment when you think you are safe, when you are completely at ease. This is not a threat, Sven Rothesby. Corleone gave Sven one last look. This is destiny. After speaking, he no longer paid attention to the other party's unpredictable expression, and actively stepped forward, walking out of the arena. The heavy shackles on Corleone's hands made a rhythmic clanking sound, yet it was like a knight in armor walking onto the battlefield, with the slight rubbing and tinkling of his mail. Gold Cloak's headquarters. Commander of the City Watch, Esser Adam Marbrand, looked at the mountains of scrolls and reports piled before him and felt like he was about to be murdered. He was tall and lean, with shoulder-length dark copper hair, handsome enough, wearing dark red armor and an eye-catching golden cloak draped over his back. Since he was very young, serving as an attendant to Lord Tywin Lannister, Adam's path had been smooth sailing. In his early years, he was knighted for his exceptional martial skill and loyalty, and since the war began, he had always led his men into battle. Especially for his bravery during the Battle of the Blackwater River, he was personally promoted by Lord Tywin to commander of the City Watch, holding significant power. Yet, this excellent knight was currently slumped over his desk, frowning deeply at the piles of documents, his face etched with frustration. The second son of House Lake injured someone while drunk on Silk Street. The injured party demands 100 gold dragons in compensation. Commoners fighting over stalls at Mud Gate resulting in a brawl, several dead and injured. A cardinal of the faith took advantage of presiding over a baptism to molest Esser Carly's eldest son. The Esser demands he be hanged. The more he read, the more irritated Adam became. Finally, he couldn't help but roar, slamming the files onto the desk. Why is it always this disgusting bullshit? A strong impulse urged him to crumple these annoying documents into balls and toss them into the wastebasket in the corner, adopting an out of sight, out of mind approach. But honor and Lord Tywin's trust prevented him from abandoning his duty, so he gritted his teeth and forced himself to reread the details of every case. 3 seconds later. Thud tilde tilde tilde. The papers hit the basket. Esser Adam leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, his frown slowly smoothing out. Bliss. Honestly, he would rather take up his longsword and fight Stannis's 100,000 troops again than waste any more time on these endless civil disputes and noble scandals. It's all that fool Janos Slint's fault. He couldn't help but curse under his breath. Originally, the City Watch had an establishment of nearly 10,000 men, but that fellow had filled the ranks with common ruffians and drunkards drawing phantom pay. Later, Jocelyn Bywater took over and drastically reduced the force to 6,000, but then a third of them were lost during the Battle of the Blackwater River. Now, he could only muster 4,000 men, and the number who could barely be considered qualified was pitifully small. 4,000 men. To maintain order in a capital city with a population exceeding 500,000, no. With the continuous influx of refugees due to the war, the actual number was likely far higher. This was simply an impossible task. This paperwork, it was fooling torture. Just as Adam finally managed to enjoy a moment of peace, a sudden clamor arose from the courtyard outside his window. He leapt up in annoyance, strode to the window, and flung it open. Shut the fool up, all of you. If you make another sound, I'll throw every last one of you in the dungeons and destroy you all. With that, he slammed the window shut with a loud bang. Fortunately, his shouting worked, the noise outside lessened considerably. Adam collapsed back into his chair and closed his eyes again. Bliss. However, this stolen tranquility did not last long. Knock, knock, knock. A knock sounded at the door. Enter. Adam roared ill-temperedly, not even bothering to open his eyes. The door was pushed open, and a gold cloak cautiously stepped inside, wearing a perfectly respectful smile. My lord, forgive the interruption. The voice was sickly sweet. Adam slightly lifted his eyelids and immediately recognized the man. Humphrey Waters, captain of the Dragon Gate Watch. What's going on outside? Why is it so noisy? Seeing that it was him, Adam's angry expression softened slightly. This fellow was usually quite clever and helped him handle many tedious affairs. He was considered a capable confidant. It's Captain Sven Rothesby. Humphrey stepped forward and replied. He has returned from Flea Bottom. Hearing this, Adam immediately opened his eyes and pressed. Is there news of young Tyreek Lannister? Tyreek was Lord Tywin's nephew, who had gone missing recently during the riot of the starving populace in King's Landing. The Lord himself was overseeing the case, and the lack of progress weighed heavily on Adam's mind like a stone. Ah, No, not exactly. A perfectly timed look of embarrassment crossed Humphrey's face, and he feigned hesitation. Captain Sven, he handled a major case in Flea Bottom. He claims he captured the former owner of the fighting pit, a fugitive named Rorger, who was reportedly reported by the current owner, Ralph, himself. Saying this, he paused deliberately, observing Adam's reaction, then added casually, "You know, Captain Sven has always been very diligent and responsible concerning Flea Bottom. And I've heard of that Rorger. He used to have close ties with Janos Slint and bribed him with a lot of money. Captain Sven is so proactive this time, he must have uncovered some important lead, right?" This report seemed honest, but every sentence hinted that Sven had some private vested interest in Flea Bottom. However, the straightforward Adam completely missed the underlying meaning of his words. All he knew was that there was no trace of Lord Tywin's own nephew, yet this Sven Rothesby was ignoring proper duties to meddle in a local gang war among the ruffians of Flea Bottom. "I don't have time for this petty, disgusting business between those scumbags." He slammed his hand on the desk and shouted angrily, "Go tell Sven Rothesby to resolve whatever he's doing immediately and dedicate all his efforts to finding Tyreek Lannister." Saying this, Adam rubbed his temples and complained, "That boy has been missing for months, and today, that wet nurse from House Hafford came running here again, holding his wife and weeping. She was complaining that with no man in the house, distant relatives kept popping up out of nowhere to take advantage of them. It makes my head want to explode just listening to it." Hearing this, Humphrey pursed his lips, holding back a laugh, and did not dare to respond. House Hafford was indeed tragic. Almost everyone in the family died during the War of Five Kings, leaving only an infant in swaddling clothes. Later, Lord Tywin, magnanimously, had his nephew marry the still nursing Lady Hafford. Everyone knew exactly what scheme he was plotting, but no one dared to say it aloud. It was just that the boy had bad luck. He should have been able to naturally inherit the vast estates of House Hafford, but shortly after, he vanished during the riots. Although his body hadn't been found, Humphrey estimated he was surely dead. Lady Hafford, not yet 1 year old, had likely become the youngest widow in all of Westeros. How enviable. Too bad Humphrey Waters was a fool. Even if she were to take a consort, it wouldn't be him. "I'm going out for a while. You look over these fooled files for me." Completely ignoring Humphrey's inner thoughts, Adam stood up and forcibly pushed him down into his own seat, intending to go out and find some peace. "I heard Sir Jaime is back in King's Landing. I should go see him." But before Adam could finish speaking, a familiar voice full of complaints sounded from outside. "Seven hells, spare me, Jaime. Do you have any idea how busy I am? King Robert left behind such a mess, the Iron Throne's debts, the money for Joffrey and Marjorie's wedding, and even the Gold Cloak's wages still haven't been secured. Gods know why I, bearing the Lannister name, should ever worry about gold dragons. Stop talking nonsense, Tyrion." Immediately afterward, another voice came. "Don't forget, you are my brother. I finally made it back from that wretched place in the Riverlands, and not only did you fail to come see me right away, but now you're dragging your feet when I ask for a small favor." "A small favor? You call a bathtub full of gold dragons a small favor? Do you have any idea how many gold dragons it takes to fill an entire bathtub? At least 10,000. Do you think I can crap gold like our father, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard?" In response to his protest, the other voice flippantly threatened, "I've already discussed this matter with father, and he agreed. Unless you wish to defy his wishes, Tyrion. Besides, since when have we Lannisters been so poor that we can't afford 10,000 gold dragons? I never stopped you when you were tossing thousands around in brothels." "Shit. Shut your mouth, Jaime. 10,000 gold dragons. Even if I lived in a brothel until I died, I couldn't spend that much money." The two walked into the room, exchanging barbs. Adam Marbrand looked up and saw Jaime, dressed in the white robes of the Kingsguard, and froze completely, his mouth slightly open, unable to react for a moment. "What? Don't you recognize me?" Jaime raised an eyebrow and grinned at him. "Commander Marbrand. The seven above. Jaime." Adam nearly jumped up in excitement, strode around the desk, rushed forward, and threw his arms open, giving Jaime a solid embrace. The armor on their bodies clanked together. "You lucky fool. I knew you wouldn't die so easily." If Lord Tywin hadn't constantly opposed it, I would have taken an elite unit and rescued you from that wretched place long ago. As the eldest son of the Earl of Ashamark, Adam was sent to Castle Rock as a page for Lord Tywin when he was young, making him a companion who grew up alongside Jaime. The two were kindred spirits, both straightforward knights who revered martial valor, and their bond was extremely deep. Unfortunately, during the Battle of the Whispering Wood, Adam, as a captain of the Lannister cavalry, was dispatched to the Red Fort to directly engage the main force of Edmure Tully, thus failing to fight alongside Jaime, and only later learned of his capture. Seeing Jaime safe and sound now, Adam was genuinely emotional. Hey, ladies. At this moment, the dwarf, who was less than a half man's height and had been ignored, spread his hands. His unique stature stood out particularly next to the two tall knights. Did neither of you notice that someone else is here, even if he only counts as half a man? Oh, look at that tilde. Hearing this, the two finally separated, and Adam showed a mischievous grin. Suddenly, he bent down and, without a word, scooped Tyrion up and tucked him under his armpit. My dear Lord Treasurer, did you bring me money? When do you plan to pay my men their 3 months of overdue wages? Money. Yes. Soon there will be. Tyrion's short legs flailed wildly in the air. Put me down, Adam. I'm going to vomit. I warn you, I'm really going to vomit, all over you, and then your beautiful armor won't be easy to clean. He pretended he was about to gag, but Adam wasn't fooled. Instead, he bounced Tyrion slightly and threatened, you say that every time. You have to pay up today, or I'll have someone sell you off to Silk Street as a dwarf male whore. Despite his words, anyone could see that Adam was handling him very carefully. He and Jaime were both 7 years older than Tyrion, and it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say they watched the boy grow up. At Castle Rock, everyone knew Lord Tywin intensely disliked his dwarf second son, but straightforward and generous men like Adam did not care. He admired Tyrion's wit and the kindness he occasionally displayed, which was inconsistent with his extremely ugly appearance. Their relationship was quite good. All right, Adam, let him go. Seeing that Tyrion was actually starting to poke his throat, Jaime smiled and reached out to intervene. Our treasurer has been driven crazy lately by the empty treasury and countless debts. He's been complaining to me the entire way. Hearing Jaime's words, Adam glanced down at the red-faced Tyrion, laughed heartily, and set him down. However, just as Tyrion was busy straightening his wrinkled, expensive coat, Adam's gaze swept over Jaime's right hand. Your hand. Jaime. The smile instantly vanished from his face, and his voice dropped low. Who did it? The man who cut it off is already dead. Jaime shrugged indifferently. It's a long story. I have plenty of time to listen. Faced with Jaime's evasion, Adam's expression was unusually serious, his eyes filled with concern. After returning to King's Landing, Jaime had been rebuffed by Cersei and his father, stewing in frustration. This direct concern warmed his heart. Thank you, Adam, truly. He grinned and said sincerely, but I don't have time to go into detail now. I came to you because I need your help with something. Just say the word. I'm looking for a friend, Jaime said. He saved my life, but we parted ways temporarily after returning to King's Landing. He said he would visit my father at the Red Keep tonight, and father specifically asked to see him. But strangely, it's almost dark now, and I haven't received any news about him. I'm a little worried because he never breaks his word. Give me a name. Adam didn't waste a single breath, patting his chest. I guarantee that Lord Tywin will see him tonight. Hearing this, Jaime smiled brightly. His name is Vito Corleone, he is a doctor. Vito Corleone, is it? Adam nodded, immediately turning back to Humphrey Waters, who was standing respectfully nearby, and ordered, notify all gold cloaks to drop everything unimportant they are doing and focus all efforts on finding this Lord Vito Corleone within the city. I want news of him before dark. Yes, my lord. And, Adam thought for a moment and added, his tone impatient, go tell Sven Rothesby to stop wasting manpower. If he delays the hand of the king's important business again, I'll skin him alive. Flea Bottom or the fighting pits, set them all aside. Tell him to hurry up and deal with that Rorger mess. Yes. Humphrey answered again, preparing to turn and leave. Wait. Just then, Jaime suddenly spoke up, quickly reaching out to stop him, then turning to Adam, his eyes growing sharp. Did you just say Rorger? The dungeons at the Gold Cloak's headquarters were always dark and damp. Many prisoners who had been arrested but not yet tried were locked up together, eating, drinking, and relieving themselves inside the cells, creating a pungent stench comparable to flea bottom. However, the cell Corleone was in was an exception. Perhaps the aura and verbal threats he had displayed earlier had worked. Sven Rothesby arranged a relatively clean cell for him, which even had only one cellmate. This person looked to be in his early 20s, and his clothes were made of fine fabric. Although slightly disheveled, they were clearly high quality, suggesting he was a young noble who had gotten into trouble. However, this fellow's presence formed a stark contrast with the miserable and wretched environment inside the dungeon. Before Corleone arrived, he not only occupied a clean cell alone, but even more surprisingly, when Corleone was locked up, the man was sitting behind a large wooden table enjoying dinner. Even his knife and fork were silver, and a pot of deep-colored wine was placed beside him. It felt as if he had come here on vacation. Sure enough, the aroma of the steak spread through the foul air, instantly stimulating the hungry prisoners in the surrounding cells. Gold Cloaks, we need food. Why does he get to eat meat in jail while we can't even see black bread? We're all prisoners, but the difference in treatment is too great. Food. Food. Soon, the angry prisoners began banging on the iron bars in unison, and curses rang out everywhere. But this commotion did not last long. Several guards rushed in carrying clubs and brutally beat the ringleaders without listening to any of their explanations. They only left, cursing under their breath, after the prisoners had huddled back into the corners, covering their heads. The young noble seemed deaf to everything happening outside, still leisurely enjoying his dinner, completely immersed in his own world. This composure was utterly incompatible with the atmosphere of despair inside the dungeon. What are you looking at, peasant? Seemingly sensing Corleone's curious gaze, he raised his head, his expression filled with arrogance and superiority. He lifted a slice of steak with his fork, showing it off, and swung it twice in the air. In a place like this, even if your pockets are stuffed with gold dragons, you can't buy a single slice of bread, understand? But me, I am the son of Count Lake, the entire Duskendale belongs to my family, and even the Gold Cloak's commander has to show respect to the Lake family. Saying this, he smugly shoved the piece of meat into his mouth and chewed. By tomorrow morning at the latest, my father will have me out of here. As for you lowlifes, you'll just rot here, awaiting legal judgment. Seeing his brazen behavior, Corleone was actually intrigued. Actually, Corleone had not planned on causing any trouble. Although arrested, he was quite calm internally and was not worried about his situation at all. After all, with the blessing of Insight LV2, he had long realized that Sven Rothesby was a greedy man who fundamentally lacked true courage. Not to mention, even Rorger, who had been betrayed by his subordinates and was determined to kill him, had the opportunity to stand trial or even choose to take the black. He was certain his situation was far from desperate. Even taking 10,000 steps back, even if Jamie didn't come for him, and even if the other party was determined to sentence him to death, Corleone would still be able to maneuver his way out. At worst, trial by combat. With fate's gamble in hand, even facing the worst-case scenario, he was confident he could stand undefeated. A meaningful curve slowly formed at the corner of his mouth, and Corleone slowly stood up and walked toward Lake. Perfect, I seem to be a little hungry. Under Lake's confused, even slightly disgusted gaze, Corleone spoke. Let's make a wager, Lake. A wager. Hearing this, Lake looked him up and down, showing a scornful expression. I doubt you have even one gold dragon on your entire body. What do you have to bet with me? Be careful, don't let appearances deceive you, Lake. Corleone did not get angry, but smiled, pulling a gold dragon from his pocket. You just swore that here, you can't buy a loaf of bread even with a gold dragon. Let's bet on whether I can receive the same, or even better, treatment than you in this prison. If I succeed, then you owe me a favor. Well, do you dare accept this gamble? Upon hearing the wager, Lake was stunned for a moment, then burst into exaggerated laughter, as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world. Bet. Why wouldn't I bet? He looked at Corleone as if he were insane. I'd like to see how a peasant like you, who doesn't even have decent clothes, manages to live better than me in this hellhole. Owe you a favor. Ha. We'll talk about that when you win, but everyone knows that's impossible. Remember your promise. Seeing that Lake had indeed accepted, Corleone ignored his mockery and nodded calmly. Having said that, he walked straight to the iron bars and spoke confidently to a guard outside. I need a meal, the same as his. He pointed to the items on Lake's table. Of course, m'lord. The frowning guard was startled by Corleone's sudden request, but then responded with exaggerated enthusiasm. 1 premium steak and a pitcher of Arbor Gold wine. I'll go get it right away. Should I also go to Silk Street and call a few prostitutes to wait on you while you dine? At this, the surrounding prisoners, though afraid of the guards, couldn't help but burst into laughter. Lake, meanwhile, gave Corleone a look reserved for an idiot. Facing this mockery, Corleone's expression remained unchanged, and he pointed at Lake again. I don't need them, but perhaps my friend here does. Pa! Before he could finish speaking, the guard spat a large wad of phlegm onto the ground. Who the hell do you think you are, a Lannister? Demanding food, drink, and women. Get lost. The surrounding laughter grew louder, full of schadenfreude. However, amidst the harsh laughter, Corleone remained calm. I am not a Lannister. But I certainly know a Lannister. Ha! The guard sneered. You know a Lannister. I've hoard with the king. Ha ha ha. Has this kid been locked up so long he's gone mad? Waves of mockery surged into Corleone's ears. Once they had tired themselves out and the noise subsided slightly, Corleone spoke calmly. Even the most foolish people are usually smarter than those who only know how to mock them. What did you say, you brat? The old guard was instantly enraged, and Captain Sven's instructions were completely forgotten. He violently pulled out the short stick from his waist and strode aggressively to the cell door, intending to give Corleone a profound lesson. The prisoners once again began cheering, waiting for the show, but just as the old guard's hand was about to touch the cell door, Corleone leaned forward and whispered, Poor old Mas Tilda. Don't you want to know how exactly you can win back all the money you lost? The moment Corleone finished speaking, the old guard's hand froze in midair. He was indeed called Mas, and when Corleone was imprisoned, Captain Sven had called him by name in front of Corleone, which was not surprising. However, why did this guy know that he had lost all his money in the casino? A flicker of surprise crossed old Mas's eyes, and he asked with suspicion, How do you know? Your fingers. Corleone lifted his chin slightly and explained matter-of-factly, the pads of your right index and middle fingers have distinct yellowish-brown marks. This isn't ordinary dirt, but rather something stained from prolonged rubbing against hard objects. The shape and size of the marks are exactly similar to dice. At his words, old Mas subconsciously rubbed his hands. Your clothes. This small gesture didn't escape Corleone's notice, but he merely curved his lips slightly and continued, There's a small, inconspicuous area of wear on your elbows and wrists, regular in shape, likely caused by repeated friction against a rough tabletop. The edges of the brass buttons on your uniform have several fresh, fine scratches. That's because you repeatedly picked at them with your fingernails when you were agitated. Honestly, no one who's good at gambling would do that. At this, old Mas unconsciously touched his collar again, then lowered his head and found that his elbows were indeed very smooth from wear. Finally, it's your face. But that wasn't all. Hearing Corleone's voice, old Mas looked up and found him staring intently at him. Your face is too dark. Dark. He subconsciously touched his face. No need to touch it, that's just a metaphor. Corleone was a bit speechless. This guy was clearly not very smart, unable to even understand such a simple metaphor. However, he patiently explained, Your eyes always carry resentment and irritation. When you look at every prisoner, it's as if you're looking at a creditor. This malice, this desire to shift your losses onto others, is entirely that of a gambler desperate to win back his money but utterly clueless. Upon hearing this, old Mas was completely stunned. The anger on his face was replaced by an unbelievable blankness. He had never imagined that his current predicament would be completely seen through by a prisoner he had never met. It was as if he was completely naked in front of this guy. Watching old Mas's embarrassed expression, Corleone withdrew his gaze and leaned back against the cold stone wall in a relaxed posture. His composed demeanor made it seem as if he wasn't in prison, but rather meeting a guest in his study. Sir. Your Excellency. This composure made old Mas feel even more that he was unfathomable. He couldn't help but humble himself, lowering his voice to tentatively ask, You said you could help me win back the money I lost, is that true? Of course. Corleone smiled. You don't have bad luck, my friend, you just need a little wisdom. Tell me in detail about your recent gambling experiences. Which casino? Who did you play with? What game did you play? Old Moss hesitated for a moment, the desire to win back his money overriding everything. It was the Three Coppers casino in Flea Bottom Alley. Recently, Harvest Roulette has been popular there. The odds are very high, and the dealer is from the casino. I placed bets with a few other regulars. I had good luck in the first few rounds and won some, but then it got strange. It landed on small 7 times in a row. Not only did I lose all the money I won, but I also lost my savings. The gold cloaks haven't been paid for 3 months, and if this continues. His voice grew softer and softer as he spoke. Evidently, the gambling losses had put immense pressure on this gold cloak. Corleone listened patiently, a knowing smile playing on his lips. This kind of trick was common and low-level, he had heard of it countless times in his previous life. They are cheating. Cheating. This conclusion made Old Moss exclaim in surprise, but, we watched them roll the dice. They couldn't possibly be cheating. Dice can be swapped at any time, it's a very simple trick. Corleone's tone was very firm. Believe me, Old Moss, they cheated you out of your money, and I will let you win it back fair and square. Lake, sitting in a corner of the cell, watched the two whispering for a long time, not knowing what they were saying. Just as he was getting a bit impatient, he saw Old Moss joyfully grip Corleone's hand, exclaiming incoherently, "Thank you so much, Your Excellency Corleone. I understand. I will do exactly as you say." However, Corleone merely calmly patted Old Moss's shoulder, smiling as he reminded him, "You owe me a favor, and I need you to repay it now. Where are my steak and wine?" "Immediately, Your Excellency." Old Moss immediately stood at attention, as if receiving a military order, "Leave it to me." With that, he turned and rushed out in a hurry, his footsteps even conveying an unprecedented drive. It's too strange. Watching everything unfold, Lake's eyes widened, very curious about what these two guys had actually discussed. However, when Corleone turned his head and looked at him with calm eyes, he felt a little uncomfortable, forcing a sneer, "HMPH, though I don't know how you managed to trick someone into getting you a meal. But ultimately, what you have now is only the same treatment I already receive, you're not living any better than I am." Watching his stubbornness, Corleone was not angered, instead, he grinned, "I like your defiant attitude, Your Excellency Lake. I hope you can keep it up later, don't change at all." With that, under Lake's faintly uneasy gaze, Corleone surprisingly turned and walked towards another slightly younger guard. Inside Sir Adam Marbrand's office, the air seemed to solidify. Seeing two gold cloaks throw Rorger onto the ground like a sack of garbage, Jaime Lannister's heart sank. Because the guy looked truly miserable. Earlier in Flea Bottom, he had been hit 3 times by the gold cloaks, and his noseless face had also taken a kick from Sven Rothesby. His already ugly face was now completely disfigured, though for this guy, disfigurement and plastic surgery wouldn't make much difference. However, the flicker of pity that had just risen in Jaime's heart was instantly replaced by a stronger anxiety. Because so far, he still hadn't seen that familiar composed figure. Where is Vito Corleone? Jaime suddenly turned to Humphrey Waters nearby, suppressing his anger as he demanded, "Why haven't I seen him? Where in the hell have you fooled guys taken him?" Facing Jaime's questioning, Humphrey's face immediately showed a troubled expression. He bowed slightly, his posture very respectful. "We searched most of the cells, but did not find any trace of that Corleone. He must have been locked up elsewhere by Captain Sven. Cross-team enforcement procedures are always a bit cumbersome, and my men are currently inquiring about the specific location." Saying that, Humphrey turned his gaze to Commander Sir Adam. "My lord, as you know, Captain Sven and his squad's responsibilities have always been beyond others' interference. You also know, after all, he is a distant relative of Earl Rothesby, a true nobleman." These words seemed to be an explanation, but in reality, they were adding fuel to Sven's fire. Bullshit. As expected, Adam was immediately enraged and slammed his hand on the table. "What kind of fool thing is the Rothesby family? Their territory isn't even as big as a whore's panties. I'm still the heir to the Earl of Branded City. Immediately go and call that self-important Sven back to me. Today, I want to see who truly calls the shots among the gold cloaks, and who gave him the guts to detain the Hand's guest. Seeing this, Humphrey chuckled inwardly, but on the surface, he sighed helplessly. My lord, I'm afraid, he can't be called back for now. Captain Sven took a few men and seemed to have rushed back to Flea Bottom not long ago, saying there might be some important task that needed to be finished. However, he didn't say what the specific task was, and I didn't feel it was appropriate to ask too many questions. As he spoke, Adam's face grew increasingly grim, and Humphrey's heart bloomed with joy. Sven Rothesby, this time you're dead. Just then, Rorger, who had been groaning on the ground, had been secretly observing for a long time and finally recognized Jamie. After all, he had cut his long hair, shaved his beard, and even changed into clean white robes and armor, looking completely different from the one-handed man who had been rolling in the mud before. Ah, Sir Jamie. He immediately scrambled forward, wanting to get closer to Jamie, but was restrained by the gold cloaks in time. Still, he stretched out his hand, crying with snot and tears streaming down his face. Corleone and I just won some money in Flea Bottom, but those gold cloaks colluded with the beast pit owner and falsely accused us of being fugitives. Corleone reasoned with them, but they just beat us to death without a word. Corleone took so many blows to protect me. They even said they would convict us overnight and hang us at Mud Gate tomorrow morning. Sir Jamie, please save us. Although I've done wrong in the past and deserve to die, Corleone, he's your savior. Rorger cried incessantly, desperately exaggerating their innocence and the brutality of the gold cloaks, his two bloody hands constantly clawing at the ground, as if to write the character for miserable on Jaime's boots. Hearing his embellished accusations, Jaime's anger immediately reached its peak. Did you hear that, Adam? He suddenly turned, his emerald eyes fixed on his childhood friend, not roaring, but his voice full of cold killing intent. My man, my savior, is in your place, being falsely accused, abused, and possibly secretly executed by your subordinates. I don't care if that Sven is a relative of Rothesby or some other fool thing. Now, immediately go and find Corleone for me, and bring him to me unharmed. If anything happens to him, I swear by the Lannister name, the Rains of Castamere will play in Rothesby Castle for at least a month. Upon hearing this, Adam's expression also became extremely serious. One must know, the Rains of Castamere, this was not just a simple song. When House Rain rebelled, Lord Tywin annihilated their entire family with thunderous means, not a single one of the hundreds of men, women, old, and young survived, and afterwards, this famous song that made the Seven Kingdoms tremble came into being. It is said that a few years after House Rain's demise, House Farman of Fair Isle began to show some signs of disobedience. Lord Tywin did not send troops, nor did he even utter a word of blame, he merely dispatched a harpist to play this song in the Hall of Fair Isle, and House Farman immediately bowed down in submission. Seeing Jaime threaten him with the Rains of Castamere, even Adam felt that if the matter was not handled properly, it would become quite thorny. What the hell are you still standing there for? He immediately roared at Humphrey. Find someone to inform that fool Sven, and tell him to drop everything and get back here immediately. And hurry up and search every single cell, one by one, search them all. Within half an hour, Lord Corleone must be brought here. Yes, my lord. Humphrey was startled at first, then quickly responded loudly. Seeing their angry expressions, he also knew that the situation was more serious than he had imagined. After a moment of hesitation, he immediately added honestly. Oh, I just remembered, there's a special cell at the very end of the dungeons, used for detaining some special prisoners. Perhaps Lord Corleone might be there. I'll go check right away. Wait. Humphrey turned to leave, but a hand rested on his shoulder. Turning back, he saw Jaime's cold emerald eyes staring directly at him. I will go with you. The dungeons of the Gold Cloak's headquarters suddenly became restless. Chaotic and hurried footsteps echoed in the corridor, the sound of armored boots hitting the stone floor was incredibly dense. The prisoners were agitated by the sudden commotion, peering out through the cold iron bars. What's going on? Are they going to execute someone? Doesn't look like it. However, their curiosity got the better of them. Get back. What are you looking at? A Gold Cloak's guard roared impatiently, his iron-bound wooden club mercilessly smashing down on every head that poked out. The thudding sounds rose and fell, and many prisoners were beaten till their heads bled, collapsing to the ground. All of you, stay put. No looking. Pull your heads back. The guards, red-eyed, shouted like they were herding livestock, and the entire dungeon was in an uproar. The prisoners trembled in fear, no longer daring to make a sound, only able to huddle in the corners, listening to the increasingly hurried footsteps outside, their hearts filled with terror. Jaime Lannister quickly moved through the dim, damp corridor, his steps swift. Humphrey almost had to jog to keep up. The further they went, the stronger the smell of mold, urine, and blood that filled his nostrils, and his heart sank deeper as they progressed. What on earth would that idiot Sven Rothesby do to Corleone? Whipping, torture, or even worse, dismemberment. Thinking this, he couldn't help but clench his jaw, the muscles on both sides bulging. In his opinion, although Corleone was very smart, his swordsmanship was poor, and he had no self-defense capabilities at all. Falling into the hands of these unscrupulous guys, God knew what he would suffer. He remembered Corleone's steady and precise hands when he treated his severed wrist. If those hands were. No, he couldn't think about it anymore. Jaime shook his head, but the horrific image of Corleone being abused lingered in his mind. The person who pulled him back from the torment and brink of death by the warriors group, who gave him new hope, his friend, if he truly suffered an irreversible fate in King's Landing. He swore he would make everyone involved pay an unimaginable price. Just as Jaime's worries reached their peak, they finally arrived at the end of the corridor, in front of the heavy iron door. A light sniff, and a fragrance completely out of place with the dungeon environment wafted over. Jaime's footsteps suddenly halted, his brows furrowed tightly. At the same time, Humphrey beside him also smelled it, and his expression immediately became strange. Open the door. Jaime quickened his pace, ordering as he did so. Humphrey quickly scurried forward, opening the iron door in a flurry without even lifting his head. Standing still, Jaime anxiously rushed to the doorway and looked inside. However, the scene inside the door made the well-traveled Jaime Lannister freeze instantly. What the fool? Thanks for watching.